The list of HIPs promulgated by the Association of American Colleges and Universities includes, among other things, learning communities, undergraduate research, community engaged learning, learning abroad, internships, capstone projects, and theses. Koo and others have reported that HIPs provide disproportionately robust benefits for students from historically underrepresented groups in post-secondary education, including African American and Latino students, which raises the exciting prospect that colleges could leverage these experiences to address equity gaps in student outcomes. It's worth noting that much of the research conducted to date has established correlational and not necessarily causal relationships between participation in HIPs and student outcomes. Nonetheless, research reporting students' own narratives suggests that HIPs provide transformative and empowering educational experiences. While some, such as honors theses, may be embedded within programs of study, these experiences are often extra or co-curricular. As such, the ability of a given student to reap the benefit of HIPs will depend on their ability to navigate the college experience beyond the curriculum in the classroom. Further complicating a student's ability to benefit from HIPs are policy-related and programmatic barriers to their participation in and successful completion of these experiences. In other words, it's not enough to simply offer HIPs to students. Their implementation is key. Today, we'll be exploring ways in which the University of Utah has leveraged HIPs to address inequities on our campus, as well as the work ahead of us. I've invited 4 of my colleagues as panelists today: Stephanie Shiver, Monisha Pasupathi, Linda Paternina Serrano, and Dean McGovern, representing a variety of programming on our campus, and to discuss the promise of HIPs to address inequities, their successes and limitations, and the path forward. They'll now introduce themselves to you, beginning with Stephanie Shiver.
Hi, so my name is Stephanie Shiver, as Rachel mentioned. I'm an academic program manager in the Office of Undergraduate Research. I have been in this office for 5 to 6 years. I'm also a PhD student in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society. And in the OUR, all of our programs are designed to support deeply engaged learning experiences, these things that we call HIPs. Specifically for undergraduate students. And my role in that is to manage some of the programs, to work with the whole team that manages all of the programs associated with our office, and to help develop programs, help develop new ones when we kind of have the space and are allowed to do that, or the need to do that. And in our office, we support students in every field on campus in a way that is directly tied to the U's mission and core values in several ways: education, research, student success, right? And so we're kind of all over the place with the university's commitment to students. So we have a pretty broad reach for how we engage students. And I agreed to be on the panel partly due to the broad reach that's tied to the inherent structure of the institution, and partly because I know that these programs don't do everything that we want them to do, or do everything that we want them to do for all of the U students. And so I'm invested in the conversation about how to develop or restructure what we have available under our office's mission to do a better job with that. And I thought that our office and our programs are a really great example of these deeply engaged learning experiences and HIPs that have some work to do to really achieve our mission equitably, and to start to enact the understanding that achievement is necessarily including equity and a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we're a great example of a place to do some more work.
So I just start, Rachel. I'm Monisha Pasupathi. I'm a longtime faculty member here at the U in the psychology department, but I am presently serving as Associate Dean of the Honors College, which is one of the best jobs I've ever had. And the Honors College is kind of a liberal arts college within a major research institution, in which we bundle a lot of high impact practices into students' experiences with us, from when they get admitted as freshmen through when they write a research thesis as part of getting the honors degree at the university. So we have a lot of different kinds of high impact practices that we engage in. And we know that those close certain equity gaps on campus, such as gaps in 6-year graduation rates. But we also know that there are a couple issues around access and inclusion that we haven't solved, like tricky problems that we haven't really figured out, and sometimes newly emerging problems. And I agreed to be on this panel because I wanted to kind of think discursively with other smart people about those problems. I also am interested in how we scale things we do in honors, because we are by definition an exclusionary space in some ways. And I'm also interested in the interplay of these experiences being extracurricular, co-curricular, and curricular, because we're, as an honors college, we're in a kind of position to make things curricular in some cases. And so I think that's an interesting part of the debate here about access and availability and impact on equity. So.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paternina Serrano. And if you notice an accent, it's because I'm originally from Colombia, but I've been here in the United States for 10 years now. And at the U, I've been 5 years. And my role at the U is to be the program director for Beacon Scholars, well, first generation scholars, previously known as Beacon Scholars. And what we do is work with first generation students, those students that are the first one in their family to go to college. And we create a space and a community for them on campus. And through that community, we try to embrace them to work together to find student success. And our number one goal, of course, is retention and graduation rate to complete the completion agenda that the university have. But we do it in a way where we do use the HIP practices, but we do them in a way where we can really tailor this to the needs of our students. Because sometimes the opportunities or the experiences that we create for some students might be exciting, but for first generation, they might be intimidating, and because they don't know how to navigate the in and outs of the college life. So that's what we do, and that's what my programs try to target. How can we be the support system for these students that we serve? So when I decided to join this panel, to tell you the truth, as a first generation student myself, the imposter syndrome in me, in the back of my mind, was like, no, you should not do it. But I really believe that my students deserve a voice in these kind of platforms, and I really hope I can represent them well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dean McGovern, and I get to serve as the executive director of the Bennion Center on campus. We are the public service and community engagement center on campus. I have been a faculty member or an administrator in some capacity for the last 21 years, working most of my career to embed community engagement into the curriculum. At the Bennion Center, we do it in curricular and co-curricular ways. We try to offer these high impact practices through courses. We have a new certificate. We also have a series of co-curricular programs that students can embed community engaged experiences and experiential learning into their major course of study. And so that's where we work. We have leaned heavily on the all are welcome format, and that is not enough. We've come to realize, and we are working hard to do better in terms of anti-racism, equity, and much more inclusion. We're doing a lot of self-reflection, licking our wounds, pulling up our big pants, and trying to figure out how to do this better, and make it so that what we can offer is available to everyone. The reason I joined the panel is because Rachel asked me, and if Rachel asks me, I always try to say yes, because I want to be around when good things happen. And I admire Rachel, and I am so thrilled to be with my wonderful colleagues.
Thank you so much to the four of you for being here today. We are going to have a bit of an abbreviated session given the technical difficulties at the beginning. And so if it's not too much to ask, while I prepared you a certain amount of time to answer some of these initial questions, if we could just be mindful of the time as we're answering them. So now we're going to begin our panel discussion with 3 questions that I have prepared to get us started. And I invite everyone who's here to use the chat to pose follow-up questions or additional questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can following these initial questions. To make it easier for me to distinguish questions from chatting, which I actually also very much encourage, if you would just write the word question in all caps, that will draw my attention to it so that I know that it's there. I'll do my best to keep track of them. So what we're going to do is go through these 3 initial questions to get us going, and the panelists will be answering them in the order that they introduced themselves. The first is, from the perspective of your office and your programming, what role can and should these so-called high-impact practices play in ensuring an anti-racist campus and education for all students?
So that means I get to go first. I think the shortest version of the answer is a big one. They can and should play a very large role in ensuring equitable access to educational opportunities and the programming that all of the specific offices offer. And that's why I brought up our programming's relationship with the U's mission and core values in my intro. Our program is tied to all of the foundational parts of the institution, and we should also be tied to the U's mission for equity, diversity, and inclusion and anti-racist education as well. We should be interpreting our programming as necessarily serving students in an actively anti-racist, equitable, and like meaningfully equitable way. We should be interpreting that commitment as foundational to all of the stuff that we do and all of the stuff that we offer through our office and programs. So when I think about what the Office of Undergraduate Research offers, what that means to me is we need to look at each individual policy, the combination of all of our policies and programs. We need to look at the atmosphere that we create through our individual interactions with students and the messaging that our policies and programs carry to students, whether that's intentional messaging or the stuff that gets packed into it because of the ways that we end up talking about things like high impact practices. And it means being thoughtful about how we talk about our programs directly to students. So we really need to be thinking about how to embed active anti-racism into everything that we do. It should be part of the bottom line foundational commitment that we make. And I keep saying active anti-racism because I think there's a huge difference between me just saying, oh, this is a commitment that I personally have. Obviously, I bring it to all of the work I do, and actually, I lost my place in my notes, actually working to dismantle it. So often we get distracted, we get placated by stuff that we see as a personal stance being enough, and that's not where we need to stop here. We need to take the active steps to be impactful with students, restructuring our programming from the ground up if that's what it takes.
So I kind of see this as 3 kind of purposes that high impact practices can serve with respect to anti-racism. And I think one purpose is to sort of undo and ameliorate and address equity gaps in student outcomes so that, you know, when we admit a student to this university, they are going to get all of the good stuff that they need, and they're going to have as good a chance as any other student of coming out the other end in my particular position with an honors bachelor's degree. And so I think that's kind of that comes really out of that original work by George Koo, where you're showing that these are the practices that not only benefit all students, but they have a really significant role in reducing inequitable outcomes in our society. So I think that's one big role. But I think some of the high impact practices that involve like first year learning communities and kind of small places for students to engage with the issues of our time, they have a different role to play. They have a role to play in the kind of things that Stephanie's talking about letting people make commitments to anti-racism in their personal lives and in their identities, and letting people think about what that means in whatever they go on to do with their lives. And I think that's a different role that can also be part of some of the high impact practices that we engage in. And so honors has some initiatives around that kind of high impact practice where we're not so much focused on closing an equity gap and an outcome as we are getting students to a space where they can talk with one another and with us about the role of racism in our society, about the ways that we might all act collectively to do something about it. And so I think that's a sort of second significant role that I see for high impact educational practices.
You're muted, Linda.
Sorry. Well, I am going to speak mainly about my work with first generation students. So I want you just to make you aware of that and what we experience working with them. So of course, I've seen evidence that show that engaging a student in the HIP practices, a student get a expand view of their college experience and they lead to a fulfilled undergraduate experience. But talking from my perspective and what I've seen so far working for first generation students, I think the important question here is, are these practices really inclusive? Are we creating these practices so all students, traditional and non-traditional students, can really access them? Or we are creating these practices opportunities so in a type of way where one fits all? This is the things that we tend to look at when we create these experiences and these opportunities in our program. In my point of view, sometimes these HIP practices outside a program like mine tend to be so embedded in the institution that we tend to forget that we as educators, faculty, and students evolve, we also forget to transform these practices at the same time so they can tailor and accommodate the new type of students we have on campus. Because we need to take in consideration that campus doesn't look the same like it did 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. I don't think it looked the same. So why sometimes are we using the same practices and giving the same opportunities and giving the same experiences to students when sometimes for some students and unrepresented students, underserved students, they don't work? In my experience of working for first generation students, and I wanna be clear about what kind of students I work with, is these students are the first one in their family to go to college. Sometimes they have to commute, so they spend very limited amount of time on campus. They come from low income families, and they also work significant amount of hours outside school while they go to school. And also when they enter the university, they immediately are academically unprepared and in disadvantage compared with the traditional students. So sometimes taking this into consideration, sometimes these practices or these policies that we are creating are not flexible enough to accommodate our non-traditional students. Because sometimes as educators, we tend to focus more on increase our retention rate, graduation rates, because we wanna move forward with the goal of the completion agenda, right? But sometimes in my program, what we have experienced is sometimes it's more important to find those experiences that really connect with the students in a way where they can translate these experiences in the context of their life. How can we make these experiences special for each kind of a student in the way they learn, what type of learner they are, their ability to learn, their background, and especially their hope of obtaining a degree. So these are things that we really need to consider when we are creating these practices. In our program, we try to focus on improving students' learning and success by providing students with a safe space, with a community on campus, so they feel they can be themselves. They feel that they can come to us with any question because we have a policy that there is no dumb question. We don't judge them because they know less or do less. We really want to create a space that they feel at home and they can just be themselves. And we do this by engaging students to teach others how to get there. We try to teach our students how to give back to the community, because I have found out that for my students, for first generation students, that's very important. And that's a very important way for them to learn too. Giving back to the community is a learning process that they use. Also, we try to do a holistic advising. Holistic advising is the core for our program, because it doesn't only focus on academically advising. We try to support our students in any way they need, any way. Outside school, what happened after school, after graduate, because as first generation students, you never stop being a first gen. Even after you graduate, you will need a support system, because you're gonna be the first one out there in the professional world. So we try to do that. We try to focus on that, and it works, but I know we can do better. We can always do better. And I know that my program only serve maybe 10% of the first generation students that are on campus. So I'm really hope we can change practices and policies so we can serve more students.
I think this is true of most high impact practices, but explicitly and specifically for community engagement and community engaged learning, it requires an anti-racist and inclusive agenda, because building community is about inviting the entire community to the process. And so it's important for the learning, it's important for the community that's being built. It's important for the impact that you're trying to make in the community, working with community partners, not for or serving in that capacity, but explicitly requires an anti-racist agenda in my mind, because we're trying to build strong, the work is trying to build strong, healthy, vibrant, inclusive, and just communities. And we have to be explicitly anti-racist to do that. We have to celebrate differences, and we have to reject a hierarchy that of race or skin color, that if that creates a hierarchy, we have to explicitly reject that. So that's what we aim to do, and we are taking stock in all the ways we're falling short of that.
Thank you all. So speaking of the ways in which we fall short, in the interest of time, I'd like to ask you to each respond fairly briefly to this question so that we can get on to our final forward-looking question. So how are we failing to achieve this promise, the promise of high impact practices? Then I think I'll take the second part of that question for the end, where we'll talk about how we're going to move forward. But maybe if you could each comment briefly on the ways in which we're not meeting the promise of these practices, the promise that these practices in principle provide for us to close equity gaps.
So I think that this is my favorite question, and I'm so glad that you asked us to answer it. I think there are a number of ways that we have failed and are failing to meet this promise, as much as I love our office and research in our programs. And they have kind of a wide range. So I think they range from something that we talked about in preparation for the panel, uncritically adopting terminology and practices that develop from either a student service or an academic affairs circle, like high impact practices, to refer to our programs and to frame them in terms of how we see them contributing to a student's education, all the way down to those daily actions that we take to implement our programs and our conversations with students. I think just like to throw out a list, if we're doing this pretty quickly, some examples of the ways that we're failing are our reliance on the way things have been done. That's always an insidious, very problematic thing. And I know that our office is trying to work on that now, but there are a number of policies and kind of frameworks that we're working in, and we kind of have to shift out of. Accepting policies and approaches that are just handed to us. instead of asking who made the policy, who did they make the policy for, and then pushing back when the policy is inadequate. Not being as active in relationship building across campus as we know we should be, as we may have wanted to be, but we didn't take the steps to enact. Not taking representation of marginalized folks seriously enough in our programming. So for example, who are the facilitators in our office's education series, which is something we've recently started paying more attention to. And we don't pay students enough. As Linda mentioned, a lot of the students on our campus also have financial commitments and family commitments outside of being an undergraduate student. And $10 an hour simply isn't enough to make your op accessible to a large number of our students, first generation students, otherwise marginalized folks on campus. And one way of kind of succinctly phrasing that is resume building is a privilege. And if we assume that our students can do the things on campus that act as resume builders, we're assuming that they have that privilege, and they don't all. And so that's something that we have to start to try to address more directly. I have more thoughts, but we can keep talking later.
I'll try to be super quick, and I'm happy to talk about details of our specific practices with anybody over email or anything like that. But I think we face three struggles, and I'm going to give them in the order in which they are on my desk and in the front of my mind. The biggest is related to some of what Stephanie has raised and what Linda has raised and what Dean has raised, and that is we have a campus where we have a substantial portion of students who are commuters and who are not residential. And historically, the Honors College has done a lot of programming around the residential context for students, which privileges those students who can afford to live in the dorms. And that carries with it all kinds of inequity. And the second, so I spend a lot of time trying to think about how to manage programming and policy that is equitable across the commuter and residential divide. The second one is in the admissions and recruitment. The language of honors colleges is something we work on very hard because it feels exclusionary. It doesn't sound to historically marginalized students like this is the place for them, even if they're capable, even if they're well prepared. And that's something that we do outreach work on, and we are still not confident we've got it right. We're always trying to build partnerships with local K-12 systems to kind of build up a better understanding that what we want are students who are willing to work hard and who are highly motivated and who would benefit from a liberal arts context, not students who would otherwise go to Harvard and pay full rate. And then finally, we track equity in a lot of our outcomes, and we have small but emerging gaps in the completion of an honors thesis in the research arm of what we do. And so we're looking right now to try to understand what's produced those gaps. Those gaps are emerging in the context of having seen a really big upswing in thesis completion among our students as a whole. So whatever we're doing is helping all students, but it's disproportionately helping the privileged. And so we want to try to figure out what's behind that and what kinds of things we can implement to close that gap before it gets big and really troubling. And so those are just three ways in which we're not where we want to be, and we're not where we could be.
Okay, I have so many thoughts too, but I'm going to try to be very short. So I really believe that my program, and I'm talking about the work that we do, we really would love more support from the U. Why? Because, well, since I started working for my program, I noticed, well, first of all, I noticed that very limited resources. We have very limited resources to work with 600 plus students over the course of 8 years. Very limited staff. We are only 2 staff right now, and then 4 leaders, students leaders, 15 hours a week. So mainly 2 full-time staff right now. So I would love to have more support from the U, and I would love for the university to understand that first generation students are a crucial part of campus. They are the ones that have they have such an important role in their communities because they are the ones opening the door for so many generations to come. Other students are looking at them and saying, oh, they did it. They could go to school. Education is the way to go. So they're gonna follow. So when we understand that, we're gonna see them as an important part in our community. And when we do that, we can really create the base of the program that they really need. Why the University of Utah don't have a first generation center? Why the University of Utah does not give me that I've been trying data on exactly how many first generation students get into the university every year? I've been trying since I started this program. I've been trying to get this data because I know I only serve 5 to 10% of them. And we were like, well, this year something great happened. Now we are in the core of campus. We're gonna be next to the union. But before we were at the annex, away from the side, from so many students, people didn't even know we existed. And our name was Beacon Scholars. This year, we decided that we need to transition out from that name and call it like it is. We serve first generation students. So we name our program First Gen Scholars so we can connect better to the students that we serve. Because I really believe that this concept need to be normalized. Because when I ask around about first generation student and I have this conversation with staff in our faculty and students, so many don't know what first generation student means. So we need to normalize this. And I really believe that first generation students shouldn't be ashamed of their identity and who they are, because it's the opposite. They are the brave ones. They are the ones taking a step forward, and they are going against what society was telling them to do or was expected of them, right? So we really need to celebrate them, and we really need to make a commitment on giving them the best college experience they can have, a positive one, so they can go back to their community and bring more students in. So I really hope that this conversation and this platform will help us get somewhere where we can all come together, because I know around campus there are so many organizations and programs working for the same type of a student that sometimes we are double serving them. And why is this happening? Because we are not communicating well with each other. So I'm hoping that after all this conversation, we can all come together, figure out a way to bring all our policies, practices together and serve the students the right way, and tailoring in a way that it will target every student and their singular experience.
I won't repeat what I've heard because we are doing a lot of the similar kinds of self-reflection that everyone's mentioned. But I will say that one of the big things we need to do, and I don't think it's just at the Bennion Center, but we have to recognize that we are fish or sharks in the racist and inequitable ocean. We are swimming in a system. Higher education was designed as exclusive. It was designed that way. And so that's the first recognition. We have to be able to overcome that we're swimming in an ocean that is set up this way. I think we can do better at ensuring that our community partners that we work with, the faculty we work with and support through community engaged learning, actually adhere to our values around inclusion and anti-racism. We ensure that they adhere to all these other things. We need to ensure that they adhere to anti-racism and inclusive values. We have not taken extra steps to welcome people, as I mentioned. We talk about that we're welcome for all, but I think we have to make it known that this place and these curricular or co-curricular programs were designed with you in mind, which is very different than you're welcome here. And I think we have to take those extra steps. And I also think that community engagement specifically is wrought with dehumanizing terms and things when you talk about service. We talk about underprivileged, at-risk communities. We talk about a problem-based sort of progression, and we need to shift more. The Bennion Center does very well at this, but I think we can do better at being more asset-based. There's a lot of wonderful things and strengths and talents and gifts in all communities. And this idea that the shining university on the hill can serve these underprivileged communities is a bad idea and needs to be shifted, where we're working with communities in an asset-based approach.
So my last question was going to be, what's next, right? Where are we going? How do we address these problems? And as I suspected, my very creative and passionate colleagues were largely unable to list the problems without also talking about the ways in which we are moving forward, right? The challenges ahead of us, but also the kind of hope ahead of us in terms of the sorts of things that we can do to address these challenges. We now have something less than 4 minutes left. I'm wondering, instead of asking that final question and going through all the panelists, does anyone want to add anything? Summarizing to the statements they've made or that everyone else has made. Have any of the panelists had any epiphanies hearing each other speak?
I just want to vote for letting the guests chime in. I feel bad that we left so little time for them.
We would really love to hear from you if you have questions.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, Linda, can I just say, I am a first-gen student, and look how far you can come. You can just live in academia for the rest of your life.
Yes, I would have never imagined that would be my case either, because I am a first and international student. So it took me a long way to understand the system and everything, but I'm here.
Wonderful. So I know that any one of us would welcome conversations with anyone who's here today. There's a reason that I brought together some of my favorite people on our campus. And as you can see, they do have crucially, I think Dean really brought this up, the humility, right? To recognize that we're probably not doing what we're certainly not doing what we need to do. And we are embedded within a racist institution. And it is going to take work, starting with humility, right? Recognizing the problem for us to move forward. I suppose I will close. I have a closing quote from Finley and McNair from a 2013 report on the promise of HIPS. They say, designing and sustaining an educational environment that results in high quality learning experiences and equity in student achievement requires a genuine commitment of time and effort, an exploration of the student experience, institutional assessment and data analysis, and most importantly, the ability and courage to implement change. I'm so pleased to have been able to spend some time with all of you today, hopefully taking a small step in the direction of that change. I see courage and I see ability in so many people on our campus, and I have high hopes for us. So thank you. I'm deeply grateful to Dean McGovern, Linda Paternina Serrano, Monisha Pasupathi, and Stephanie Shiver, and also to all of you for taking the time out of your days to be here. I hope it's a wonderful day and weekend, and thank you again.